Hi friends, Tracy here from the Sewing Channel. In today's video, I share with you my journey of machine quilting on my domestic home sewing machine. In order to learn how to free motion quilt on that sewing machine, you need to start. So that's why I'm going to share with you my entire progression from 2020 until now, 2024. Let's just say I've come a long way, baby. Enough talking already. Let's jump right out of the gate with 2020. This is the first time that I aired any of my free motion quilting on YouTube. Now, typically I would use some basting spray, but I'm out. So I'm going to improvise, no pun intended, and I'm going to pin my quilt sandwich together. So I do have an idea of some really easy patterns that I normally do like to do. So those are the patterns that I'm using. Some are figure eights, some are the swirls. And if you don't have the free motion foot, you could always use your walking foot and do a lot of different straight lines, and you could do some diamond shapes and different things. I mean, honestly, it's whatever you want, whatever you feel like at the moment. Now, those of you that have never seen one of my earlier videos, you can tell here I'm using a totally different sewing machine. This particular sewing machine was a brother that I purchased at Walmart, and it was about, I want to say $250, $300. That was my first quilting machine, so to speak. Now, if you're just getting started with free motion quilting and you don't know too much about it, this would be a perfect project to start with because the area is so small. It's not like it's a quilt or even like a sampler quilt. It's more low scale and small. Actually, it's whatever size hoop that you have that would frame the project. And it's very, very beginner friendly. And if you make any mistakes on it, oh well, who would notice anyways, right? Now, I totally cut my teeth in free motion quilting on that sewing machine. I practiced so much on that machine, I can't even tell you. So many projects were done on it, and the good thing about that was I started with a smaller machine, smaller projects, and just worked my way up. That's the best way to go when you're first learning how to free motion quilt. Don't just automatically think that you're going to jump right into it and be totally good. It takes a lot of time and energy and effort to get it the way that you want it. Now, even though it may look like I have it all together in this video as I'm debuting here in 2020, but actually I did a ton of practicing or quilting beforehand, even before I started my YouTube channel. That's when I did my daughter's quilt. That's not in this video, of course, because I had done it prior to my YouTube channel. But a lot of you have seen it where I show what a hot mess and how tight all the quilting is and whatnot. I'll pop a picture here just so you can, be in the know of what I'm even talking about. But I say all that to say that you have to start somewhere and you have to be bad in the beginning in order to get good or decent in the end. But can I tell you that there's no perfect ending in free motion quilting on your domestic home sewing machine? You just get better and better. You'll never be perfect, but you will get better. I promise you. You just have to keep going. I know it feels awkward in the beginning when you're trying it on your sewing machine, but that awkwardness will go away and it will become second nature to you when you sit down to actually quilt your quilt on your domestic sewing machine. It all comes down to how bad do you want it? I'm serious. I mean, if you really semi want it or, you really don't care if you can do it or not, then you probably won't be successful, right? But if you set your mind to it and it's something you really want to do, you can do it. I promise you, you can do it. To this very day, this sewing project that I made in this tutorial here hangs in my second sewing room. Yep, I look at it every now and again just to see how far I've really come. Now remember, we just have our quilt top and our batting together at this point. Now what I'm going to do is just outline all of my pieces so that they pop and stand out in the end. And during that point, I'm going to go ahead and echo around the pieces and do some swirling within and between all of those pieces before I go out to the outside. Now, since this is not a traditional quilt, in my planning stages, I had to figure out how I was going to actually connect the minky to the dense quilting that I'm doing on this quilt. So I decided to go ahead and connect the batting and the topper together like you see that I did. And then when all the quilting is done over the entire quilt, then I'm going to add the minky on and I'm going to top stitch around each of those appliques, because remember, they're only temporary, they're not permanent. And that's perfect for what I'm going to do because I needed a way to connect all 3 layers together. Here's a bit of footage for you to enjoy while I free motion quilt some of my quilts for my granddaughter. When you learn the art of free motion quilting on your sewing machine at home, you can just really specialize these quilts and make them so custom. On this particular quilt that I did for my very first granddaughter, Josephine, I put little hidden Mickeys all over the entire quilt. She is 3 years old now, and we need to take some time, her and we need to search for some of those hidden Mickeys. I haven't even really talked to her about it because I've made her so many quilts since then. You will notice also in this quilt that I do put a special message here at the end, and I call myself Grammy on the quilt, which was kind of weird because that's not who I am today to her. I am Mimi, so that's kind of funny. But when she gets older, she'll be like, why would my Mimi put Grammy on this quilt and not Mimi? So that'll be a talk later, I guess, that we'll have together. So I guess it's totally true. Every quilt has its own quilt story, and this one is no different. It definitely has its own quilt story to tell. Free motion quilting is a ton of work. There is no doubt about it, but this quilt is so beautiful and so worth it for my granddaughter. I can't wait to see it all done. Here's a shot of my setup right before I started connecting all the mini heads to the back of the quilt. I started in the center and then worked my way out, doing each mini head separately, one by one. In my testing phase, I tested a lot of different ways how I was going to do this, and the best way that I found was with a walking foot and a small zigzag stitch. I found that it gave the best, most consistent stitch out of all the methods that I did try. Here's a quick screenshot of my plan coming all together. This part right here I very much disliked, but just take your time and go slow and you'll be fine. And the end result, take a look at the back. Oh my word, it just looks so darling to me. I absolutely adore this Minnie Mouse quilt. It turned out exactly how I envisioned it. Here, I'll let you take a closer look at my quilt backing. You can see all the mini heads right there, how cute they look. They're all just like floating on the back. It's just so cute. Here's a closer look at the front coming up. I just love how those colors just pop right off of that white. Oh my goodness. As a side note, I put enough hidden Mickeys in this quilt that she will be busy for quite a long time. Don't forget, coming up here in a second, I'm going to show you my special note that I free motion quilted to my granddaughter. She surely will be able to use this quilt up until her toddler and young childhood years. Exactly the plan. As promised, my special note. The inspiration for today's quilt came out of this American quilt book from the Smithsonian Treasury. This quilt is from the 1800s, and they sewed theirs all by hand. I don't know about you, but I'm not sewing that by hand. But I guess back then, if I had to, I would have. Here's yet another Smithsonian quilt from the 1800s. I am in awe of just how beautiful and intricate the work that went into these quilts really was. I mean, they would use everything from scraps from clothing to feed bags, whatever they could find. Making quilts has been around for a very, very long time, and I feel honored to even be considered a quilt maker. I bet those women from the 1800s would think our sewing machines were magical machines. This is one of the quilts where I actually broke out and did a lot of fun stuff. It is part 1 of 3 in a series, and it was such a fun video series to do. This is where all the pool noodles come in and just all that fun stuff. If your work surface is not big enough to cover your quilt, add some tables to the end of them to help prop your quilt up. But the first thing you're going to do is grab your pool noodle and your quilt top with the quilt top facing up. You are going to pin that first part of your quilt top and then evenly roll up the rest of your quilt top, just like you see me do here in the video. Before I learned this method with the pool noodles, when I would make a quilt, I would have to get down on all fours on the floor and baste my quilt together. It actually was a nightmare. I would always fret getting down because of my back and trying to crawl all over the floor, make sure everything was even. I mean, I hated it. But with this method, it's easy peasy. When you get to the end, go ahead and pop one pin in to hold it and then set the quilt top roll aside. Now on to roll the batting. Did you know that there is a right and wrong side to place batting in your quilt? When I was first starting to make quilts, I never knew that. So I'm going to share it with you. If you run your hand lightly over one side of your batting, you will feel like a bumpy side. And then if you turn it over and lightly feel the other side, it feels more flat. Well, the flat side you want to go toward your backing, and the bumpy side, the fluffier side, you want to go toward your quilt top. If you don't place your batting properly within your quilt, then when you go to start to quilt your quilt, you will have little pieces of fuzz come up from the batting to the top of your quilt. The needle will actually pull it up with it. Now onto the backing of our quilt. With right side down, go ahead and pin and roll that pull noodle onto the backing. As a side note, I actually used an old sheath that I had on hand for my backing. And sometimes I even order vintage muslin sheets off of eBay to back my quilts. They're super soft and have a very strong thread count. So you're just going to continue to roll your backing right up onto that pull noodle, being sure that everything is nice and even. Now this is how we're going to put it all together. Take that backing and roll it out. With your hands, you're going to pull out any wrinkles. You want it to be nice and flat. Next, lay your batting out. Even up the edges there at the bottom that are towards you, and lay the batting out nice and flat. Again, with your hands pressing out any wrinkles that may be in the batting. Then take your quilt top and even it up on the edge there, the part that's towards you, and then roll it to meet the other two pull noodles toward the back of the table, and spread everything out nice and even with your hands, as flat as it can be. Today, I'm going to use basting spray to baste my quilt together. If you're using a spray though, be sure to open a window and wear a mask for the fumes. To protect my table from overspray, I do use a towel and some parchment paper. From my 5 odd sewing tools video, we are going to utilize one of those hacks, and it's putting the pool noodles on the edge of our table, but this time it's going to help us so that our pool noodles that are rolled up don't roll off. The next step, lift your top and your batting up. only exposing the backing. Spray it, then lift your batting down, smooth everything out with your hands, being sure that there are no wrinkles whatsoever. And then the next thing you're going to do is spray your batting. And after you spray your batting real good and you've covered all the area, go ahead and take your quilt top and lay that part down. Smooth out everything, all the wrinkles, being sure that it's nice and flat. That is the first part. That beginning part is going to be what goes on our fourth pool noodle to start it. Now grab that fourth pool noodle and some pins and go ahead and just like we did them singly, now we're going to do them all together on one pool noodle. Go ahead and lift it up and pin it there in the middle and then do the sides. Now you want to make sure that this part is really even as you roll it up onto that pool noodle. And then you want to just go ahead and roll up only the part that is basted so far. So only the part that you sprayed so far. As you start to roll that beginning part, go ahead and pull all of the quilt and pool noodles towards you. Once you have all 3 layers that are basted up on that fourth pool noodle, then you're going to roll the quilt top toward that. And then you're going to roll the batting toward that, which exposes the backing again. And make sure you give yourself a good enough space there. And you're going to spray it, just like you see me do here in the video. And then after you've sprayed that, you're going to roll back the batting. And as you're rolling it back, you're spreading with your hand and you're smoothing out really nice so that there's no wrinkles at all. And then when that part's done, grab your spray and go ahead and spray that whole area on the batting. And then you're going to take your quilt top, spread everything out right on top of that batting, smoothing with your hands all the way so that there are no wrinkles left. Once that's nice and smooth, grab that fourth pool noodle and roll up that freshly basted area that you just basted together. Roll it up and then pull the whole thing towards you. Then you're going to roll the backing out toward the back of the table, just like you see me do right there. Spread everything out, spray it, then take your batting and roll it right over that freshly sprayed backing, spreading out just as you did throughout the whole process, making sure that everything is nice and smooth. And then you're going to take your spray again and spray the batting. And then you're going to take your quilt top and roll it over top of the batting, smoothing the whole way. You will continue this process until you get to the very end of your quilt top, batting, and backing, being sure that everything is as smooth and as even as it possibly can be. When you get to the end of the quilt, go ahead and take out all of the pins that you initially first put in all of the pool noodles. This process is so quick. When you finally get to the end, you're like, oh, wow, I'm at the end already. Once all of your pins are out, you can set those 3 pool noodles aside. And then you're going to go ahead and baste the very end of your quilt. You are going to spray the backing and then lay your batting down and spread out nice and evenly with your hands so there's no wrinkles. And then you're going to spray the top of the batting and then lay your quilt top down, spreading out nice and evenly with your hands. When you end up at the end, this is when you can cut off any extra that you may have excess of. Like I had extra batting, so I went ahead and just cut a strip of that off. I did not show that on video though. But once you have the end all done and basted, you're going to continue rolling it up all on that 4th pool noodle. As promised, how to tell the difference between the back and the front, or the right and the wrong side of your batting. Lift your batting up just a bit and steady it. Take your pin and I want you to look away. Be sure that your fingers are out of the way though. And what I want you to do is just nice and easily start poking the batting without looking at it. What you're looking for is resistance. Turn it over, steady your hand, fingers out of the way, look away and go ahead and start poking the other side. If you are meeting resistance, you have found the flat back side of your batting, and that goes toward the backing. If your pin goes in nice and smoothly and meets no resistance, you have found the fluffy side, the bumpy side, the side that goes toward your quilt top. I hope that makes sense. I made a huge mistake with this quilt, and I don't want you to make the same mistake that I did. 10 months ago, I spray basted this quilt in my video. I rolled it up on the pool noodle and I put it in my closet to figure it out another day. Well, that was a big mistake, because what happens is when you do that, everything kind of crinkles up together, and it has all these lines where it had just suctioned itself within the quilt sandwich. I had at first thought that I would separate the layers maybe, but I decided against that in the end, and I just tried to press it all out to make it as flat as I possibly could, because I was going to be doing a lot of free motion quilting on this quilt. So as you can see here, that's about as good as it's going to get. Lesson learned. This is a shot of the back coming up here. I wanted to show you what it looked like from the back with that first initial stitch line. I did serpentine lines throughout the entire crumb block area, framing in, making like a tic-tac-toe grid, as you can see here. This really helped attaching all the layers together, because I knew I wasn't going to be really free motion quilting in the center of all the crumb blocks. The main free motion quilting was going to be all around the outer edges, framing everything in. And you can see there, after I did the serpentine lines, I did do one straight line boxing in all of those crumbs. Once everything was all tacked down, then it was time to tackle how I was going to do this free motion quilting on the outside of this quilt. I knew I wanted a nice frame around the entire crumb area. So I don't have regular free motion quilting rulers, so I just grabbed my 2.5-inch ruler that I had and just used it as a guide. And I just boxed out that first area, making it 2.5 inches all the way around. I used it as a guide only, but you could totally use your marking tools to make that line and just follow the line all the way around. With that first initial border, I took my pencil and just made a light line from the corner out to that 2.5-inch border there. And that was just a guide to help me for the next step in free motion quilting. You can see here why that line is so important, because I go from big ribbon candy to tiny ribbon candy, and that just helps make everything nice and symmetrical. Here I'm just showing you how I went from the larger ribbon candy into the smaller ribbon candy into the corner. Now, mind you, this is the first time that I've ever done ribbon candy. I honestly do more improv free motion quilting. I don't typically have a plan like I did for this quilt, so I still have a lot of learning yet to do, and so my work's not perfect, but whose is, right? I don't know. Probably Angela Walters. Hers is perfect, because I watch her a lot and she's got such great ideas and techniques, and she's got this free motion quilting down spot on. So if you get a chance, you really should watch some of her videos. More than anything, this quilt for me was a lot of practicing. I use techniques and different free motion quilting designs that I have never used before ever. So it was a lot of fun to just learn these techniques and just to actually do it. Here I'm just taking that ribbon candy and making it real small there in the corner, and then I'm going to show you how I start it. So I start off real tiny, and then I get larger as I go, and then I just fill it in the rest of the way. I mean, it looks pretty good for a first time anyways. I don't know. The next step was to create yet another border area around those ribbon candies. So I decided I was going to do serpentine lines all the way around that outer edge of the ribbon candy, but I wasn't going to do one, I was going to do 3. So I followed it all the way around 3 times with serpentine lines. I do speed up the video here just to get through it for you so you don't get too bored. But I was really taking my time with this. My fear was that because it was rolled up the way it was and it had so many creases in it, was that I was going to get a lot of tucks as I moved along while I was free motion quilting. So after the 3 serpentine lines that I initially did, I went around again and I made these sort of pods like. They almost were like in a leaf shape. After I created the pods, I then went around and just, as you can see, I just did kind of like a curved shape back and forth within that leaf, which made it really easy to do. But it looked really cool and it filled it in really, really good. This is a good filler. After I had put all of the curved lines and all of those pod leaf things, I went around again with the serpentine line 2 more times. And this is what it ended up looking like. And so far, so good. I'm really enjoying the process of this, and I'm really liking the way it's all turning out so far. For the next border area, I knew that I wanted to make it a little bit larger than the 2.5 inches that I initially made around the crumb blocks. So I took out my 9.5 inch ruler and I lined it up along the crumb block area, which gave me enough room toward the outside to make just a straight line all the way down, because I was going to fill that with a bunch of swirls, which I knew how to do. So those I've done a lot, and so I wanted that to be a big filler in that area. So you can see here I'm just making a lot of swirls just everywhere. Big ones, small ones, medium, you name it. There were all types of size swirls in there. But that line that I made, that I used my ruler as my guide, that helped me so that I did not go out of that area, and it just gave me a nice guide to stay within. If you struggle with free motion quilting like I did, and still do even, I have a video on a great free motion quilting hack that I use to help me retain muscle memory on any quilt design that I want to make. Before I learned this hack, I used to make a lot of tiny quilt sandwiches, and I used to practice a lot on them. But the thing is, I used to throw them away when I was done because, I mean, what are you going to do with them, right? I was so frustrated with the process of learning free motion quilting. That's why I came up with this hack. The hack, it's a game changer, so you definitely need to check it out. Back to the swirls. Now, as you can see, as I'm making the swirls, I'm going one direction, and then I kind of go down my quilt a little bit, like right there, and make my swirl go in a different direction, because I didn't want them all like facing the same way. I like that diversity of one looking one way, one looking the other way, one pointing downward, one going upward. Well, you get it, right? As I'm coming down at the end there of the one side, I'm taking note of that very light pencil mark that I made. Remember, we made a square around each of the corners, so I was mindful to stop right there. Once all the swirls were filled in all around, it was time to figure out the corner area. I decided that I wanted them in sections, so I just took my curved ruler and I ended up making 5 different sections that were sort of long, going out toward the edge of the corner there, and I'm just marking it very lightly with my pencil. So I could make it somewhat even, I used the one end of the ruler right up on the corner of where my crumb blocks were, and that helped just to be a guide, really. And then I took it to the sewing machine, and on each of those lines I made 2 lines of stitching. I wanted each of those sections to be very defined sections, so they didn't run one into another, so that it looked like it was a spray coming out of each of the corners. I don't know, in my head it sounded real good, but we'll see how it ends up. If you're not familiar with my channel, then you may not know that I had a special addition come into our family this past February. You may have guessed it. It's my new granddaughter, Josephine, and she's not so new anymore. She's getting really big. But I watch her during the week so her mom can go to work. So I need to balance between sewing and spending a lot of playtime with my new grandbaby. Here I just wanted to show you the different sections with those double lines. It really makes a good definition. And oh yeah, she was in my sewing room for a good bit of this day. She just really wanted her Mimi. I don't know. I loved every minute of it though. It took a span of about 3 days to finish all of the free motion quilting on this quilt. So we'll see if Josephine comes back for another visit here before the end of this video. Keep your eye out. On one of the sections of the quilt, I was trying to master pebbles. Pebbles have always been really hard for me to free motion quilt. So I knew I was going to incorporate them into this quilt somewhere. So I figure I did probably 2 sections on each of the corners in all pebbles. And it really did help to keep going over it and over it and over it again, just strengthening that muscle memory. And since I have not mastered making them all the same exact in diameter, I do big and I do small and then a couple big. So I'm all over the map with that one. I decided in this section to do a little bit of improv free motion quilting. And all that is really just not having a plan and just going in and kind of just doodling on your quilt. I started this section with making a really big leaf shape. And then I echoed inside instead of outside. So maybe that might help you with your echoing if you try doing in the inside after you make the outside. I don't know. It's kind of fun. So then I made a shoot coming out the side of that other leaf. And again, I made it bigger and then echoed on the inside. And you can see there I filled in with just lines wherever there was any extra space. And then I came up and I did a really big swirl. And I wanted that to look like it was just shooting up out of those leaves. I guess I'm not really an artist, so to speak. I don't draw or anything, so I'm not sure when I'm doing this if it's going to turn out, but I have an idea in my head, so I just kind of went with it. So I knew I wanted to come out and make another couple different swirls coming out of the side of it, but going in the opposite direction. I think it balanced out that big swirl in the end, and then I just echoed some on the side there and then came around and then just did some fill-ins. Whenever I was in doubt on what to do next, I usually did those little curvy fill-in lines, and that seemed to really do the trick. I decided to add some little scallops and echo them on top of this big swirl, and I liked how it ended up looking. And here's just a shot of that entire section after I was done with it. In another section, I decided to free motion quilt some different heart shapes. And I really like making hearts. They're really easy to make, and it's just like a curved line and then down to a point and then back up around, and you just echo a lot. And you can make them in all different directions like I did on the swirls. After I would make some of the heart shapes, if I made them big enough, I would always echo on the inside and then again on the outside. It just switched things up a little bit and made it a little bit more fun and interesting, for me anyways. And here's just a shot of those hearts after I was done. And here's some wishbones that I decided to incorporate into one of the sections. So as I was going here, you'll notice I kind of just stopped and I started making circles because I sort of messed up on the wishbone, and I thought, oh, I don't want to unpick that. So I just took it right into some pebbles. I want you to notice here that I changed my free motion quilting foot to the stationary quilting foot. I was trying out both of them, the one with the spring and the one without, to see which one I liked better. And I liked the stationary one better. I'm really happy at the way things are turning out so far. I think we have a future quilter here. What do you all think about this? Little Josephine just loves the ruler and loves the sewing machine. Or do you think it's just Mimi? I think it might be just Mimi. I don't know. I knew exactly how much space I had to free motion quilt those side areas that didn't have anything on them. And all I did here was just do some back and forth, not hard lines. They were curved on the top and bottom. They were kind of like wishbones, but I never crossed over. And I left enough space on the very, very edge so that the binding did not cover up the ends of this free motion quilting part. I tried to get really good lighting so you could see the whole quilt and the detail of it, and I think I've achieved that. Let me know down in the comments though. The journey on this one was really rewarding, and they're all a little different, these quilt journeys. In the end, I think it really did turn out well. I learned a ton along the way, and I hope you did too. In my videos, I try to get you to think outside the box. I always want to inspire you to go farther than you think that you can go. Cathedral window quilt. It was the biggest sewing accomplishment for me, and boy does it feel good to have this behind me. Next, we're going to take that 9.5-inch squared piece of fabric and fold it in half one time, and then we're going to put a crease with a hot press right in the side there. That crease will help us feed our sides of our fabric into our machine evenly. So next we're going to take it to the sewing machine, and with that folded side going in first to the sewing machine, you're going to go ahead and put a 1/4-inch stitch down both sides. Now I chain stitched all of mine at the same time, so I would go down one side, all on one side, and then turn the whole batch around and go up the other side. One thing I want you to take note at this step, I want you to back stitch at the very beginning of each stitch, and at the end of each stitch, when you come to the end of that piece of fabric, back stitch again. That's going to be very important when we turn this inside out. We don't want any threads coming loose or apart. And you can do that while you chain stitch too. You should end up with something that looks kind of like a pouch or a envelope type deal. So what you're going to do is take those two seams that you just sewed, the opening there, and you're going to make those two seams kiss or nest right up next to each other. We need this part to be really even, otherwise our block's going to be wonky. Once you get them kissing and nesting perfectly, go ahead and pop a pin right in the center there. Once the middle is pinned and secure, you're all set to run this through your sewing machine. This is probably the most trickiest step in the whole process. So I want you to start at one end, keeping from the middle up. I want you to keep the one side nice and straight. I don't want you to worry about the bottom part that's away, the farthest away from my presser foot right now. I just want you to make sure that that part from the pinned area up is perfectly straight, and you see me fussing with it right there to get it perfectly straight. Then I'm going to lift my presser foot up, and I'm going to do a 1/4-inch seam all the way down just past that middle area. Meanwhile, don't worry about what is on the other side of that pin. Just focus on this very first part before you get to the pin. You start on that edge, you also need to back stitch. So now you see me getting right up close to the pin there. This is when I'm going to leave my needle in, and I'm going to lift my presser foot up, and I'm going to put my finger inside of the fabric right there, the other end that's not sewn, that bottom part after the pin. And I'm going to just fuss with it a little bit, trying to get it straight. Now I'm just focusing on everything after that pinned area. I'm even pulling away from the top portion and pulling more toward me on that bottom portion because I want a nice straight stitch here. So I'm going to hold my finger down, my index finger of my right hand there, and I'm going to feed it through. I'm going to go in about an inch after that middle area, and I'm going to stop and back stitch and cut my threads and lift my needle up and take my piece out. This is what you should have so far, just 1 inch or so after that middle pinned area. Now we need to finish sewing the rest of this area. So what I'm going to do is just show you here 2 inches after you made that stop and you pulled your piece out, that 2 inches right there, we're going to leave that open because that's going to be where we turn our work. So you're going to want to go about 2 inches down from where you just stopped and backstitched, and you're going to sew straight down a 1/4 inch just past that to the very end, and then you're going to backstitch at the end of that as well. You should have a tiny area that has no stitching on it, like I'm showing you right there. There's a little like hole, so to speak, and that's where we're going to turn our work. Just before we turn it, this is what you should have so far. It's like a little puffy square kind of thing. It's kind of weird looking, really. And there's the hole right there that we left open. We didn't stitch right there, and everything is back stitched all on this entire piece. You back stitch on everything because we don't want anything to fall apart. So now I'm going to take it and put it right side out. And I do utilize a pokey tool, so if you have like a stick or something that's kind of blunt, not real sharp, and you're going to poke out all 4 corners of this block. Once all the corners are nicely poked out, you should have something that looks just like this. I want you to take note in the center, that nice X area right there. It's nice and crisscross. That tells me I'm gonna have a nice, pretty straight block. Now take note on the area right there, the opening that we left open. I leave that open. Now I know a lot of you might say, no, you need to sew that. Well, some do, and you can if you want, but I don't, because it's hidden and never to be seen again. I backstitched, and it's okay, trust me. So I'm gonna give this a nice hot press and make sure that everything is nice and creased. Now I don't wanna pull and yank on the fabric, of course. I just wanna nicely press it down. Once everything is nice and pressed, you're going to take all 4 corners and you're going to meet them in the center, just like you see me doing here. And usually how I did it, I put 3 down on the right, gave it a good little press, and then I added the other one in and then pressed them all together, front and back. Now it's going to be time to get out our old school needle and thread, and we are going to connect all 4 points in the center, connecting them to only the one piece that's closest to the points there. You're not going to want to put your needle all the way through this entire block. So you're just going to grab that center X area that I showed you. You can knot it there, however you do it, but you're just going to connect all 4 of these points together by hand stitching. And when we would take trips, I would do this part, or if I was watching television, I would just have a big stack of these and just, you know, hand tack them down. It was kind of nice to have a hand project where I wasn't actually in the sewing room. So I know some actually do sew it down with their sewing machine, but I didn't like the end result of it coming through onto both sides of the fabric. So that's why I ended up choosing to hand sew this portion. And if any of you have been a part of my channel here for a while, you all know I hate to hand sew. So this was a big deal for me to hand tack all these down. I mean, all like millions of pieces is what it felt like, seriously. This is what it should look like after everything is nice and secure and all tacked down. You should be able to stick your finger, just like you see me do, right through to the other side, but yet still being tacked to the center of that fabric. Now we're going to give it a nice hot press. Here are 6 of those pieces all hand tacked down and ready to go. This is what I consider one entire block. 6 of these tiny 9.5-inch squared pieces that we started with, all of them together will be one block in the end. The next step is to zigzag stitch the top row together and then the bottom row, and then add row 1 and 2 together. Before you do that though, you should really audition your zigzag stitch so you don't mess it up, because it will be seen on the back of your quilt. Here I'm showing you on this scrap piece of fabric the different zigzags that I auditioned. I ended up picking the one on the bottom, but in my initial quilt I actually picked a more scant zigzag. Once you figure out what you like, then you're going to butt these 2 pieces up as close as you can together, following the guide on the middle of your presser foot to help you. You're going to zigzag straight down on these 2 pieces. Be sure to backstitch at the beginning and backstitch at the end of this block. One of the main reasons why I really did like this technique as opposed to the traditional way of attaching them is because, as you can see here, as I come to the end of attaching these two blocks right there at the end, I can literally pull one side more if I need more within that stitch or less. It made my blocks more predictably even, if I can say that. Now you're going to attach the third one in the row onto the two that you just did. And then you're going to go ahead and repeat on that second row, adding those three together. Take your time on the zigzag process. Sometimes if I wasn't focused enough, I would notice that it would kind of veer off a little bit. And when that happens, that is no good, because that means that that zigzag, the one side, is not catching the one side of the fabric. And that's no fun when you're done with a row and you look and you see that you've totally missed a spot. So just continue sewing all of those 6 squares together, making that one block. For a visual, I wanted to pop this picture in here and show you that those 6 pieces that we're just now sewing together, that red square that I have marked on this picture indicates those 6 pieces compared to the rest of the quilt. Hopefully that puts it in perspective of just how many pieces of those 9-inch squares go into this quilt. Just take your time and zigzag till your heart's content. Once you have all 6 pieces together, it's now time to put our 2.5-inch squared picture inside of the windows. Now, I did purchase a 2.5-inch mini square, which totally helped me out on this project. For my quilt, I chose to not have any repeats, so I had a lot of different fabrics. What you're going to want to do is place them on the zigzagged area. Now, your mind will probably want to tell you to put it over top of the part that you hand sewed, but that's not the case with these, because you need 2 blocks in order to make a picture window. And I'll lay it right there. See, it's not, you don't put it over that spot. You put it over the portion of where the zigzag is, because you're going to pull the bias over from each side, which is actually pulling from 2 separate pieces. Once you have your 2.5-inch squares placed where you would like them, you can either pin them down, or you can also utilize just some glue stick to glue them down just temporarily until you can get them sewn on. Before I take it to the sewing machine, I will show you how we're going to pull the bias down over all 4 sides. You see where the zigzag is there, it's laying on the zigzags, and then one part is tacked down from the hand tacking. You're going to pull that over just like that and then sew right along there. And then you're going to do that on all 4 sides. Now, I did do something different on mine. I did 3 sides, and then I put a very tiny pinch of batting, or polyfill is what I used, inside of each square to make it a 3D look and give it just a little bit more dimension. And when you only have 6 to deal with that are connected at one time, it's very easy to sew these down. It's when the quilt gets really big, like how I ended up sewing and finishing it this week, where I had to go inside of the quilt toward the middle and sew these down. Now that was a little difficult, but this first stage, when you're just getting all of the initial blocks together, it's really simple to maneuver within your sewing machine. So here you just see I picked a side and pulled the bias flap over, making the one side of the picture window, and then I'm going to pivot and go down the other side. And so that I don't have to turn too much, I'm going to try to make a path where I don't have to lift and cut my threads too often. The beauty of a cathedral window quilt is that as you're doing this portion right here, by sewing those flaps in and making the picture window, if you look on the back here, as I've posted this picture here on the right hand side of the screen, it makes a beautiful quilting on the back of your quilt, which in the end is really cool because your quilt is fully done when you're done with the initial sewing. So once I connect all these together, it's done. I don't have to sandwich it together with batting. I don't have to bind it. I don't have to quilt it. I don't have to send it to a quilter. It's done because the quilting is done within the process of making the quilt. After all 3 sides were sewn on each of these picture windows, I then took my pinch of polyfill and just tucked it inside and then pulled the other side closed and then just stitched up the 4th side. Here I'm just demonstrating about how much polyfill I put in and how I did it. I just shoved it in there, pulled over the other side of the window, and then just stitched it up just like I had stitched the other sides of the picture windows. This is what one block looks like, and there are 7 picture windows here. Check out the back. It's already done and already quilted. You don't have to ever touch that part of the project again. That's the beauty of the cathedral window quilt, I think anyways. Take note when I add the other block with the one that we just made, that only when you add them together will you create yet another picture window right down that center area. Essentially what you're going to do is keep adding these blocks to make your quilt bigger and bigger and bigger till you get the size that you would like. When you're all done with your quilt and you've made it as big as you'd like, go ahead and clip off all of the excess threads, just like I'm doing here. Now they'll be on the front and the back, and there will probably be a million of them, just an FYI. Here is my quilt, a video of it in all of its glory. I wanted to sort of lay it flat so you could get a good feel for the magnitude of the size of it. It really is gorgeous. I am so grateful to all of you that pushed me through to the end, to the finish end of this quilt. Honestly, it was your motivation and your quilt stories that never got finished, your quilt stories that got finished. It was all of it. It was everyone coming together that really blessed my heart and pushed me further than I wanted to go. But I'm so glad you did, and I'm so grateful, and I'm so thankful for this sewing community. I really am. Now we're all going to have little quilt door hangers on our front door. How cool is that? So this is what it looks like after it has been ironed on, and it sticks like glue. Let me tell you, you don't have to sew on it, not at all. And then the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and put our free motion quilting foot on, and I'm going to free motion quilt an echo around this entire letter D. I have to tell you though, it was a lot different trying to free motion quilt on outdoor fabric as opposed to our quilting cotton fabric. Even though it was different though, it was still a lot of fun. I love trying new things, and I love things that are different. I did have a few skip stitches here and there. I wish I would have had a jeans needle because I think that would have worked out best. I did end up using my titanium needle. I went ahead and I free motion quilted this flower, and I did have a few skip stitches in there, so what I did was I had to go over it and over it and over it again to kind of give it that filled in look. Then I just went around the border a couple of times, just doing like a squiggly line, so to speak, all the way around. I do like how that free motion quilting ended up along the border. Who knew that we could make a little quilt door hanger, outside door hanger, out of outside furniture fabric? I sure didn't. Not until I made this project anyways. This quilt door hanger will be easy to clean, wipeable, and it will never fade. That's awesome. Raw edge quilting, which exposes all of my seams everywhere, including on all of the roses, which makes a super soft chenille type quilt. This quilt as you go raw edge applique quilting is really easy. There's no special patterns or templates or rulers either. I'm going to show you two different ways to make this quilt. One with a regular sewing foot all the way throughout, and of course how you can do it with a free motion quilting sewing foot. I chose the heart motif to be our first free motion quilting block in this quilt sampler because I figured it was just a familiar shape and a lot of you would have that muscle memory already built into your brain, hopefully. But you see here, all I did was start in the center and make one big heart shape. And then I echoed inside of it, coming down to the point, that bottom point of the heart, to close everything up. Now, this is one of the reasons why I really love So Fine thread by Superior. You can literally go over this threading area several times with thread, and it doesn't build up like your normal thread would. It's really nice. So you see here, I'm going to make a big heart, and then I'm going to go ahead in the inside of it. And then again in the inside. And you see here, I kind of changed directions there and I messed up a little. I was also trying to practice going horizontally with my free motion quilting, and that's a little tougher for me to get, but I try it here and there to see if I can get it. Now I messed up there. I won't fix that. I'll just keep going and you won't see it in the end. Now you can see here that every time I hit that middle area of where all those points hit on the heart, I'm building up thread there. And you can't even tell. Now I want to break out of this cluster of this bouquet of hearts and come out, and that's what I did right there to change directions of the way this heart was going. In order to do that, I had to figure out where there was more space on one side of that cluster of hearts, and that's when I just broke out and then turned it the opposite way of the heart that was right next to it. And then I just echo it and echo it and echo it and fill in with those curved lines. And anytime I got in a bind and I didn't know how to get out of a situation, I just threw in those curved lines. Here I'm showing you another mistake that I made. I accidentally echoed on the inside of only half of the heart. So what I did to fix that was I immediately went on the other side of the heart and just made a mirror image of it and did the same thing. And nobody's going to be able to tell, as you can see right there. Once I got the cluster of hearts in the center as big as I wanted it, because that's the focal point of this particular block, then it was time to fill in the rest of the block. And that's what's so nice about these small quilt sandwiches for these sampler quilts. They're just big enough so that you're not doing a whole lot, but it looks like a whole lot. I still have so much to learn when it comes to free motion quilting. I've been trying it for about 3 years now, and just here and there I'll try to do a project, and it only keeps building and building with practice. At first, when I started, I was so uncomfortable. I thought, oh my word, what in the world? How am I going to do this? And it's like drawing with your sewing machine. But like with anything, you have to practice the technique. Otherwise, you're never going to learn it. So you can see here in the corner why these lines are really necessary. They help give me a guide to where the end point is. And you can see there, I put that heart in the corner over there, and I used the point down in the corner, and that really helped me pull that heart outward. And with this design, I'm just putting a lot of other little hearts and echoing all around that burst of hearts in the center, and adding a lot of little curved lines like you see me do right there. That helps because the shape of the top of our heart is curved, and so when the eye sees those curved lines, it just thinks it's another heart. And so I just keep going around and around. Another good reason to make sure those lines are there is when we go to connect these blocks together with our sashing, we don't want the tops of or the bottoms of our hearts to be cut off. I mean, I don't want mine to anyway. Now, after we connect all of our blocks together in the end, I may change my mind. I might want to add a little something. I don't know yet. I want you to notice in the corner there was a tiny space left. Now, I would not have known that unless those lines were on there. So I put a very tiny heart in there, which totally makes things blend. As we go through the sampler quilt and we continue forward, I'm going to try to give you a few tips that I've learned along the way in the past few years. I mean, like I said, I'm no expert at all, but I have a few things that may help you. One of the biggest tips that I could give you, and it concerns thread breakage. I used to break thread a lot and it would shred, and I'd be like, what in the world? I'm doing everything that everyone says to do and I'm still shredding my thread. Well, come to find out, I was turning my quilt or my quilt sandwich, whichever I was working on, I was turning it too much and then turning it back again too much. Essentially what I was doing, I was twisting my thread underneath my presser foot there and in between my bobbin. So I was literally tangling myself up, and then as it would try to shoot through my material, it would break and shred. So once I paid attention to that and kept my quilt or my quilt sandwich pretty steady, I would only turn it here and there, my thread totally stopped shredding and breaking. So if you're having that same problem, try to keep your quilt sandwich or your quilt going in one direction, only tweaking it a little to the right or a little to the left. Sometimes I know you may have to turn it pretty good amount, but that's okay if you're only doing it once. But if you're doing it consecutively over and over again, that's going to cause a tangle and breakage. So I hope that tip really helps you out. So you can see right here, I'm going to go along the edge a little bit, right there. And in the end, after I'm done with this block, I am going to outline the entire block with some stitching. And I don't know, it just kind of closed everything in, and you can choose to do that or not to do that. It's totally up to you. You can see here I'm in another corner position there, and I just made the point of the bottom of the heart come out of that corner, and then just echo around and fill in with some curved lines. It's been a while since I've been so excited about a quilting project, and this one has me so excited. I cannot wait to get through each and every one of these blocks. I hope you're just as excited as I am too. Now here we're coming to the end, and all I do to tie mine off, I mean, I'm not an expert at it, remember, I just stitch back and forth and cut threads, and I can never see it on the back, so I think I'm okay. With this one, I started with the bottom of the leaf, and it was off center. It was not right in the center of this quilt block. It was kind of down and off to the center. So I made both of my leaves first, and I echoed inside, and then I made one big swirl. And then I put these 4 different quadrants around my swirl. And I count them like that because that was the easiest way for me to do this flower. And I'll show you on the next one here. So I do the swirl, and I do 1 quadrant, 2 quadrant, 3, and I'm going to do a little 4th one right there. Now if it was the bigger flower like in the beginning, it was a lot bigger of a petal around there, and then I just echoed around. And I just added leaves in wherever I, thought a leaf was needed, and I just kept going around and paying close attention to where I was headed though, because I wanted to make sure that that cluster was toward the center, and I wanted all of the corners to be no floral because that was going to be where the waffle went. So you can see here, so I'm coming around that swirl, and I'll show you here. Oh, I'm going around the leaf first. Now 1 and 2, 3, and 4, and then I echo back around. Now I count them because it made it a lot easier for me to remember that that was going to balance out that rose. And every time I would make one, like I would count 1, I would put a little dip in it, just like a little curve almost, just to give it some body. And that just seemed to make a really pretty flower, or rose, it looks like to me, I guess. And I echoed when I didn't know what else to do. I did make a few mistakes on this one, and I do fix one, and I have to unpick, and I will show you that in the video here. Here we go with the swirl again, and then we go 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I went around the leaf, and then I'm going to come back around and echo. These were really so much fun to make. They are my favorite. And I feel like I could make these like a lot of them and I would be okay. Now here's my mistake. I kept making circular rounded leaves instead of pointy ones. So I unpicked it and I came back, and this was the leaf that I put in that place. I mean, I didn't show you the unpicking and all that. I mean, you could tell it was a bad leaf. Next time I make this design, I'm going to try making that swirl, the line within it, a little wavy and see how that makes the rose look. Because as I'm looking at it from here, from this angle, watching me actually free motion it, like you guys are watching it right now, it looks a little stiff in the middle. So I'm thinking if I went a little wavy and then added those 4 around there, how that would look. I think it would look good. What do you think? Let me know. For whatever reason, I was having a really hard time with pointy leaves. And that's exactly what I wanted, was a point on the end of these leaves. I did not want them to be rounded. And it seemed like I kept doing that over and over again. And I'm not sure if it was because I was so focused on the roses and getting those right that I think in my head I already know how to make a leaf, so I'm not going to really concentrate there. I'm going to put all my focus within the flower. So I'm not sure. And then when I did that, I was starting to mess up on the leaves a little bit. I don't know. But all in all, I really do like the way this block turned out. I really do. And if you feel like you don't have enough balance on one end, just add a leaf sticking out of the cluster toward whatever barren area you have, and that should really help balance it out. So you see there, I was just echoing around everything kind of, and just making everything stand out around the roses, because we're going to go right into the waffle here in a minute. You can tell I really did struggle with the leaves, and I left most all of them. I only unpicked one of them, so there are a little, pointy, roundy leaves. Oh well, what are you going to do? Like that one, I don't know what I was doing there. I ended up leaving it though. So you see here, once I had a moment where I figured, well, I was done with the cluster, I went straight out following those, I think they're registration lines is what you could call them, keeping everything nice and straight. So I'm just going back and forth, being very mindful of those blue lines. There was a couple times where I could tell I was slanting to one side, and because of those lines, I straightened it right back up. And you can catch yourself and totally straighten yourself back out, even if you were slanted. So you just really have to pay attention to those. And you can see here, I don't have real big spacing in between there. It's just, they're not touching though. The lines aren't touching at all. We just have just enough space in between, like a waffle. And you're going to go right up to your floral cluster there, and you can follow along. If you hit a leaf, you would go down the leaf a little bit and ricochet back and go back to the edge and catch your blue line on the edge there. And this part went surprisingly really, really fast. Because you're just doing a straight line and you have such like an open road, so to speak, it was really easy to get through this particular block. Now the roses did take a little bit of time. None of these blocks should take you more than an hour though. I mean, this one probably was the most time consuming out of all of them so far, but realistically, it shouldn't take you more than an hour. So you're just going to keep on going until you get somewhere where you really can't go anymore. And then you're going to turn around and go crosswise on the lines, making that really cute, tiny, dense, micro waffle look, which I absolutely love. It's very pretty. It really does make our floral cluster just stand right out. With this waffle design, since the cluster is in the middle and we have the waffle design on all four corners and everything in between, you may have to break thread and go back in and crosswise some of the waffles. So keep in mind that that may happen. You may be able to get in there and travel. You can do that too. You don't always have to break thread. I mean, I think I traveled on mine, to be honest. Here I'm going to be practicing my horizontal lines again. Oh my word. There are just some things that are so hard for some people. So you can see there, I switched back to back and forth. It's just really tough. So, okay, so I hit the corner there and then I came straight down. We're starting to hit all of our waffles now. You're just going to go straight down, and same thing, if you hit a flower or a leaf, you're going to bounce right off of it and come right back up. And you're going to make sure that you're watching those blue lines too. A couple times I wasn't watching and I got kind of off track, but the minute I noticed it, I was able to get right back on track again. I mean, look at how cute they are. They're just darling. And you can see there I went in and filled a little leaf that was kind of messed up from earlier. You can catch some of your mistakes too and fix them like I did. And you're just going to keep going until everything is filled in. You'll probably end up taking it out and looking at it and going, oh wait, I forgot that little tiny patch in there. It depends on, how dense you made it and whatnot with your cluster, and how deep the in-betweens are. I love how this turned out. This is by far my favorite block. Making that tiny heart shape first really helped me get into that very first feather. And those felt pretty comfortable to me. As you can see, they look pretty decent, I think. And you can see I'm coming up to that registration line, one of the straight lines that I put on the curve. And remember in my last tutorial where I said to respect the line, so we're going to make that feather smaller and not go beyond that line, and then we restart our feathers. If you missed that tutorial, you'll have to check it out. There was a lot of really good information in there about how to make feathers look curvy. So you can see right there, I just respected the line again and then continued on with my feathers, and so far so good. Now I'm coming up to a cross section and I really had to think about this part because I didn't want to touch my feather on that other blue line there, which is the other side of the heart, because I didn't want them to be, too congested right there. I wanted them to look separate. So I think I did achieve that in the end. I don't know. I guess we'll see though. So anyways, I get to the end here and I make that one last feather, and then I backtrack all the way back down that vein, and I come all the way back around to that very initial first heart shape that I made in the center. That whole first part felt really comfortable to me. But I think I have issues with making the feather on the opposite side. So I think I really need to practice that. Here's another area where it gets really congested. The other half of that heart, the left-hand side, is right there. So these feathers right here, I made a little bit smaller so that way it's not so congested. Now here I was getting a little frustrated because I'm like, which way am I going? Because when you're doing these feathers around a curve on the outside, you really, really have to think about what you're doing. And I was trying, and in that, as you can see, I totally missed my mark on the outside of my heart. I wanted to make my feathers really big and billowy hitting those outside marks, and that didn't happen. Not on this one anyways. But nonetheless, I kept going because that's the only way I'm going to get any better at these feathers. So here I'm just really trying to recover from all of those bad feathers. And, you know, it is what it is. I think I started to gain control about right here at the end of that feather. And what I did was make a really cute little heart at the very end. And I thought that that part was really cute. Overall, looking at it, not too bad. But I did miss those outside marks. And I don't know, I just really wanted to hit those. See right there? Yeah, it's so far from where I wanted to be. But practice makes perfect. Now I started on the left-hand side, starting at the top. And I did try something a little different at first there just to see if it would work, and it didn't. I tried one feather on one side and another on the other, like going back and forth, and that didn't really work out too good. So I just continued on like normal. And so far this side of the heart on the outside seemed to feel a lot more comfortable to me than the other side. So here I'm coming up against another congested area, and I think I started to freak out a little bit. So I started to make the feathers a little bit smaller. Then what I did after that is just travel straight back up to the center of the heart. I'm going to continue my feathers down, and as you can see here, I totally did not respect the line. I didn't take my own advice and do my own rules here. So yeah, I think I just was getting a little frustrated. But you see here, I traveled through some feathers to get to that last little piece at the end. And that one seemed to go okay. Seemed a little bit smoother. A little bit frustrated though, because I really had to think about which way I was going. And then at the end there, I did end up putting a little heart when I was done. To me, I think this block is a little advanced, even for me. I mean, but how are you going to get to that point unless you actually do it and practice it? So for me, it was excellent practice. Now, I had to sandwich this all together, and I did it on my pool noodles. Now, if you're not familiar with the pool noodle method, once everything was sandwiched together, it was now time to free motion quilt this beautiful rainbow quilt. Now, it met me with some issues and some problems, let me tell you. And I had just picked up my machine from being serviced too, so I thought, what in the world? Ended up, I had the wrong free motion quilting foot on. Once I put the right one on, mind you, after I was halfway done with the quilt, then everything seemed to work out. But here you can see I'm just doing a bunch of swirls all the way around. To be honest with you, I'm not really that happy with my free motion quilting on this particular quilt, but I made it through and I persevered. Oh my word, when I look at this quilt, it makes me happy. I ain't even kidding you. I get happy when I look at this quilt. I'm so excited to be able to give this quilt away to one of you, my subscribers. That was the whole reason behind this quilt. That was the inspiration, the creativity, everything that I did on this quilt was absolutely with one of you in my mind. Using the lid from my basting buddy, I measured out perfectly circles in every single center of my hexagons. It's good to always put straight lines where you're going to be doing ribbon candy so that you can keep them nice and straight as you free motion quilt. Did you guess what number 6 was going to be to make your quilt stand out? I bet you did. It's free motion quilting your quilt yourself. How much more unique can you get than that? When you free motion quilt on your sewing machine, it is so versatile. Right now, I'm doing a swirl in the center with some feathers all the way around. And because I have all of those white hexagons that I need to fill in with this design, it's going to be so nice and easy instead of having to have one pattern that just goes over the entire quilt. I'm able to strategically place these right in the center of each one of these hexagons. Check out that custom work. My original design, I only wanted to put free motion quilting in every other block, so to speak. There was going to be like dead space in the back, and I was okay with that until I started taking pictures and video of it after I thought I was done. I went ahead and washed it and dried it with every other being free motion quilted on the back. Can I just tell you that I didn't like it? After looking at it, I was like, oh my word, this quilt needs more. Possibly some of those cabbage roses could make their way into every other block. And so that's what I did. I went ahead and free motion quilted the rest after it was already washed and dried. And it came out perfect. Here is some footage of me free motion quilting those cabbage roses on the dead space on my quilt. I had literally no issues at all with any type of pulling of fabric one way or another after I've washed it and dried it. I was thinking there could be an issue, but honestly, there are zero issues. In one of the previous videos, if you recall, I used Wonder Under and fused that to my flannel batting that I used and then pin basted it to my quilt top. And I will tell you, I had zero issues with any stretching of any minky. It worked out so well that I would definitely use Wonder Under again to fuse to my flannel and then fuse that to my minky to make sure that there's no stretching involved. It works so well that now I am a Juki Junkie affiliate, and using any of my links to purchase any of their machines only helps the sewing channel out. For me and my quilts, I always do a subtle quilt design when they're so patchworky busy like this. A very simple meander is perfect for quilts like this and quick and easy. Oh my word, check out this beautiful crumb cake quilt. I am in love. It turned out so good. After I was done binding it after the free motion quilting, I then washed it and dried it, and the measurements did shrink up a bit, but that's okay. It has that beautiful crinkle effect that we all love. And check out that plush backing with that free motion quilting on it. Oh yeah, it is so comfy. So this is a free motion quilt design that I came up with off the cuff the moment I turned my camera on. Yep, for sure. That's the way I roll sometimes. It's called Geometric Graffiti. Anyways, that's the name I gave it, right? So it's just whatever shape and straight lines. You could do anything that has an angle to it. Works. You could even do stars or whatever, and you just keep moving, and there's no way you can get stuck on this anywhere. Now, if you know me, you're probably wondering, why is she using black thread? Well, that's not how I wanted to start off. I started with white thread, and I did do a little mock-up with the minky and everything that I was using, and I was seeing fur coming up through the threads, which made it look like black thread was coming up, and I disliked that. But later I found out through my friend Di from Sister Chicks Quilting that when I washed it, those furs would have came out of those thread holes. So, you know, live and learn. But actually, I think it ended up being a happy accident because I am loving this geometric graffiti in black on this light colored quilt. I really do like it. Tell me in the comments what you think. I want to know your honest opinion on this black thread on this type of quilt. I do think it would have been a bummer if I would have done all this free motion quilting in white and then you could barely see it. So I am super happy with all of this black. And I didn't make too many mistakes on this one, so I don't mind showing off the black. So I'm really hoping that you're able to see all the geometric graffiti that I did do on this quilt, but I have to like spread all of the nap one way in order for you to see it. So hopefully you can get a good view of that. It looks so cool in person. This Minky is showing up a little, oh, I don't know, light on camera, but actually it's very jet black and very beautiful. I don't know if I can get like what it actually looks like. Like the dark color, I don't know. Like it's more like this darker color. It's showing up light, but I don't know why, but it is. Anyways, there's a good shot of the geometric graffiti. It looks really cool. Love it. I'm really happy with the way that it turned out, honestly. So here's the best video that I can get for you because there's a lot of light out here in my living room, and I wanted you to be able to see the quilting. You can really see it, how it shows up on the green and the yellow. Look at that binding. Oh, it's so pretty. You can probably tell I'm super proud of this one. Wow. This one was a lot of work, but it was worth it. Look at how massive this quilt is. I have done so many quilt tutorials on my channel that it was so hard to choose which ones I was going to put in this video. So here at the end, I have some honorable mentions because these are some of my favorites. This is the rainbow boho quilt where I took the raw edge applique and then I quilted all these beautiful swirls all around it. And this comes from much practice too. So from that very beginning video, you can see just how far I've come, especially on this particular quilt. And this has Minky on the back, which takes a little bit of tweaking in order to get that just right. But I love how it turned out. Check out the back. I mean, the Minky with the quilting, it just totally makes this quilt pop. And this was for a little baby girl quilt for one of my friend's daughters. I just love how it turned out. Another honorable mention is my Scrapberry gingham quilt pattern. A lot of you have made this quilt, and I did a whole entire video on all of your quilts that you made so that I could showcase all of them. It was so much fun. This is a free pattern on my channel, by the way, so you'll definitely want to check that out. If you have any questions about any of these videos that I've shared with you today, look at your screen right now. I have collected all of them in one playlist so that they can be easily found so that you can dive deeper into each video. So definitely click the playlist on your screen right now so we can keep learning together. Until next time on the Sewing Channel, take care, friends.